homework.
Acts.
Some people read the homework.
18.
All right. Chapter 18 of Acts. So what's that chapter about?
I think Sister Cam over here ready to go with it.
Come on, tell me what it's about. We really want to talk about really the first part of it.
Yes.
So what's it about?
Well, it's about Paul, and he's talking and speaking to the people.
People of where?
Corinth.
Corinth. It's Paul starting the church at Corinth. So this is a church that Paul founded.
That's right.
It wasn't a church that he went to like when he went to Antioch that was already going. This is a church that he planted.
Mm-hmm.
So him, Silas, Timothy, a few others that was there with him, they helped get Corinth started. And he went to Corinth
Aquila.
after he was leaving Athens.
That's right.
Okay, but now he even went to Athens because they run him out of Philippi.
Yes, talk to him about that running him out.
they run him out of Philippi.
That's
So
right.
he ended up in Athens. And then he went from Athens to Corinth. All right. Now we're going to get into why he run out of Philippi, but they run him out. But I will say this: it was from preaching the gospel.
That's right.
He done nothing wrong.
Nothing at all.
It was because he was preaching the gospel. So doing God's will and doing God's work
That's
sometimes
right.
can get you in trouble.
Amen.
And they got Paul in trouble a lot of times when they about people who didn't like him.
That's right.
And folks who was jealous and wanted stuff. So they run him out. And so he ended up at Corinth.
Mm-hmm.
Now Corinth, and I showed that where that was last time. Corinth is right here. There's Athens. There's Corinth. And he started off way up here in Philippi. And this is actually Greece, okay? This is the country of Greece.
You don't got your corner to take.
Oh, I think I do. All right, they can see that. I thought they could see that. All right. All right. Turn my pointer back on. Uh-oh. I might be out of power this time. Oh, no, I'm not. That's Corinth right there. Okay, it's a little isthmus, and it connects the Ionian Sea and the Aegean Sea. And there's actually a canal, I talked about that last time, that goes between this and allows ships to easily flow from this side over to this side, okay? So now, Paul was originally in Troas over here, and this is actually part of Turkey today. And I'm not sure if Philippi is part of Turkey today, but it might be. But I know this is. But he went from here to here, and then eventually he worked his way from Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, and down to Delphi, then to Athens, and from Athens he went to Corinth. Okay, but now this is more than one journey on this picture. So it's actually on his second journey that he founded the church at Corinth. Okay, that was a third journey, but on his second journey he founded the church at Corinth. So Paul goes and he founds this church. Now, this is an interesting thing that happened at this church. Now, when he went to Philippi, there was no synagogue. There was no synagogue. Now, normally when Paul went to preach, know where he went to preach first? He went to the synagogue, went to the Jews, and tried to preach to them. And then if they rejected him, then he pull out a few folk and he go ahead and preach to the Gentiles. But when he went to Philippi, and you got to read chapter 16 sometime, he had to go down by the river and preach. They didn't have no synagogue. And I won't tell you about that, but you read chapter 16 sometime. But in chapter 18 in Corinth, there was a synagogue. And so he started off preaching in the synagogue. Now, something strange happens in the synagogue. What was it that was strange that happened in this synagogue? I'm not sure that it happened in any other synagogue than this one.
Was that when the Lord spoke to you?
Huh?
Was that when the Lord spoke to you?
God did speak to him, and I forgot. There is a spot in there where God does gives him but God speaks to him to encourage him. And we're gonna get to that part, huh?
Not the. Yeah.
Yeah, but God does speak to him to encourage him. But that was after. I think he got kicked out of the synagogue by then. Something happened in this synagogue.
You're talking about when the leader was
The who?
when the leader of the synagogue was beaten up?
Well, why was the leader beaten?
He didn't do anything about this.
Now, one because he didn't do anything about Paul. What happened?
Was it because what Paul was saying, the preaching that Paul was doing?
Paul was preaching about Jesus. He was pointing out that Jesus was the Messiah.
And they didn't believe it.
Who didn't believe it?
The
Jews.
The Jews in the synagogue. But what happened to the leader? There's a reason he got beaten.
Because he believed.
2 leaders of the synagogue got saved. That what happened.
Oh, yeah.
The leader of the synagogue believed Paul, and so Paul went to preaching, I think, at his house.
Yeah.
And then that leader, the leader that replaced him, was persecuting them, and he must have got saved too. And so now they beat that. So when Paul gets drug in to be beaten, they beat the leader of the synagogue too. And the reason they did that because he got saved. Imagine that. The leader of the synagogue. Now, nowhere else do you read that, a whole lot of that, where the leader of the synagogue gets saved. Because most of the time, they the ones leading the beating. They leading the beat down. But this leader gets saved, so much so to when in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, in verse 1, when it says Paul and Silas, that other guy that's in there that's called out, that's the leader of the synagogue, the one that got saved, that got beat.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? He started off being a persecutor of the Christians too. Just like Paul. That's right. He started off just like Paul. Mm-hmm. They were both persecutors of the Christians beforehand, and now he's down with Paul. He's traveling with Paul, founding other churches.
Ain't that something?
You don't have that today, but leaders get saved.
It could.
Oh yeah, I hope so.
I tell you what.
I hope so.
If he did it before,
I would just ask.
he can do it again. If he did it before, he can do it again.
Yes,
I know that.
And so
that's a challenge.
The thing is what happened was Paul preached Jesus Christ. He didn't preach Paul. He preached Jesus Christ. And sometimes, no matter how much we want to, we can't resist the word.
Not when you get a taste of it. But Paul had gotten a taste of it way back in Damascus, on the road to Damascus.
Because he used to be what? A persecutor of the church.
And he was dealing now with his own people, the Jews.
That were persecuting. So one persecutor can guess what?
Can get another,
which is what he did. And so you got 2 guys that were persecutors of the church that are brought together. In this case,
I was speaking of the real church of today.
Yeah.
You know, leaders. If I'm leading and I'm teaching and I'm doing this, we have a soul too.
That's right.
And there are times when we need to go to the altar.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Amen. We're gonna get to that.
It ain't no sunshine.
Because in chapter 18, somebody just talked about that. There's a section in here where there's some things that happens here. He meets Aquila and Priscilla. That's right. And they're tent builders, so he builds tents with them. Work with them. But then he's going in and preaching to the Jews, and then when they reject him, he shake it off. He goes to the Gentiles, and he also meets Titus Justus, which is he was a worshiper, and so he's another one that gets. So he's picking up all kinds of folks on this this journey. But now down in verse 9, God has to encourage him. That's what you're talking about. God had to encourage him. He's been kicked out of the synagogue, but now the synagogue leader then got saved and stuff. But God has to encourage him. So because a lot of them got baptized,
That's
and
right.
even though people was getting saved, Paul was getting discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting discouraged because he been beat and kicked out of just about every place he been.
Everywhere he goes.
And at one point, folks traveled over 160 miles to come and get him. They went from Poseidon, Antioch, all the way down to Lystra, I think it was, and drug him out the city and stoned him and left him for dead. They thought he was dead. Some of the disciples picked him up and took him back inside because he woke up, evidently. So Paul and that was on the first missionary journey. He went back to them churches and preached some more. And on the second journey, he'd already been run out of some places. And so folks getting saved, but he got discouraged.
Yes, and in that discouragement, in God's vision to him, it's just like with us today. We get discouraged and we're ready to take out. But God had to stop and encourage him to stay here a little while longer because my job is not yet completed.
Yes.
So,
You know, are you able to do that? You are a preacher, teacher, or whatever, pastor, whoever it is today.
Yes.
Do you have to deal with what? Ain't nobody taking you out there in the woods and throwing rocks at you and stoning you, but they sure can beat you down.
Well, I'm just saying, they beat you. It might not be physical rocks all the time, but they beat you. And then you just get tired too. I was telling her, sometimes you do so much and you work so hard, you get tired. But God encouraged him. God encouraged him.
right.
He didn't wait for somebody. He said, do not be afraid.
That's right.
Go on speaking and do not be silent.
That's right.
For I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you. For I have men in this city who are my people. So God encouraged him.
That's right.
God encouraged him. Sometimes we need that.
Amen.
God encouraged him. And then it says he went on, he was there for another year and a half.
That's right.
He kept on working. Gave him enough strength. He stayed another year and a half. Whereas he might would have left, even though some folks was just baby Christians. But he hung around another year and a half to strengthen him up because God encouraged him. And that help leads us to our lesson. Is one of the first things we find out in chapter 1. Remember, I told you we was going to come back to that. And I talked about Susis being there with Paul. Is that God called him. That the big thing is here that he's pointing out in 1 Corinthians 1:1, and he's wanting the Corinthians to remember, is that this whole thing was God's idea. It was not his idea. It wasn't their idea.
Nope.
It was God's idea. God was the one who's the author of all of it. God was the one that called him and made him an apostle. He didn't make himself an apostle. He had not been around long enough to see Jesus personally. So God sent Jesus, and Jesus came to him. He didn't go looking for him. He didn't even know he needed to look for him. He did not have that great sense, that great knowledge. He wasn't so wise that he figured it out. God came to him. It was God's idea.
Amen.
It was not his. And guess what? Our salvation wasn't our idea either. We might think it was, but trust me, you wasn't that smart. Nobody's that talented. Nobody's that good. So it was God's idea. So by the will of God, by God's will, that all of this happens. And then he says the church belongs to God. Built the church.
That's right.
It's God's church.
That's right.
God built the church. Why? Because he wanted to. Because he wanted to. If God don't build the church, guess what happens? It don't get built. It'll fall. And except the Lord builds the house, what? They labor in vain who build it. God's the one that's got to do it. It ain't going to happen because you're so strong, because you're so smart and you got so much. It happens because it's God's idea. God's behind it. So this whole thing is because God enacted it. It wasn't because we enacted it. We wasn't that good. We wasn't that smart. God was the one who did it. He's the source behind it. He's the motivation. He's every part. God is the one. Without him, it don't happen.
That's right.
Without him, it don't happen. It's null and void. And not only that, but it talks about God giving grace. The idea of grace is that we get something that we not only do we not deserve, it's something we didn't earn.
That's right.
And in fact, we didn't know we needed it. And the scripture says that by grace we are saved. Once again, it was God's idea. He even gave us the faith to believe. Imagine that. It was all his work, not ours. You know what that means? That we can't stick our chests out. And we can't put nobody else down because they're not saved. Because guess what? You didn't save you. You didn't save you. And it ain't that you're so smart or that you're so talented or that you didn't catch it because something great about you. It's because something great about him. So we should, yes. So we should celebrate him and thank God for him. And guess what we ought to do for those who aren't saved? Pray for them. That he might offer them the same grace that he gave you. That he might offer them the same grace that he gave you. That's what Paul did for so since he offered him the same grace that God gave him. And by God's grace, he took it. Even though he was the ruler of the synagogue. Even though it meant that he get kicked out. And he probably didn't know he was going to get beat. But God did it. He was willing to suffer all of that because of God who did it. And then he goes on to say, the person who's blessing us was God our Father. He's the Father. He is the source. He is the provider of all of this. Not us. He's the provider. It's all about him and not about us. Now, Paul is letting them know this at the beginning of his letter. And he's letting them know this because he's got some stuff to tell them. But they got to remember this when they hear the rest of it. See, it sets the stage for the whole story. If you miss this part, you're going to miss the story. Okay? If you miss this part, you're going to miss the story. The correction and all of that don't make no sense if you don't get this part. If you miss this part, then shame on you. This is it. It starts with God. It starts with God. And so all of the information, the instructions, it don't make no sense without God. Okay, it starts with him. Even our obedience starts with him. The idea, all of it starts with him. And then it comes through his son, Jesus Christ. Why does it come through his son? It was his ultimate expression of his love. It was the ultimate expression of his love. And giving his son, guess what he gave? Of himself. God gave of himself. He gave of himself and he gave his all. He didn't hold back. He gave his all. So when he asked for something from us, guess what he gave? He gave his all. He gave his all. Can he ask all from us? He gave his all. None of us would give our sons or our daughters, but he gave his all. He said, him being God, how much more does he love his son than we being evil? So he gave his all. So it all came through his son.
Yes.
His son's sacrifice. So it didn't come for nothing. It didn't come easily. It didn't come with no cost. It came from him giving his all. Not because we earned it. Didn't deserve it. In fact, in Romans, Paul said we was his enemies. We wasn't even his friends. We was his enemies. Yet he did it anyway. God gave his all. And not only that, but he's also faithful to what he said he's going to do. Because guess what else he gave us? He gave us a present by giving us Christ.
Yes.
He gave us a present. That means that we're taken care of in the present. He gave us Christ. So he gave us provision. We're taken care of in the present. Today, we're okay. That's why we can have peace. Because he gave us a present in giving us his son. He did. He gave us a present. We're okay today. We're okay today. That's what you got to know. You're okay today. He gave us a present in giving us his son. He gave us the present. We have the present already. He took care of our past in giving us his son. All that messed up stuff, it's okay. It's done with. It's over. He said he put it as far as the east is from the west. They can't meet. He's forgotten it. He's cast it into the sea of forgetfulness. He's forgotten it. What sin? When they talk about this, he goes, what sin? I don't remember no sin because his son paid for it. So he's taking care of the past. He's given us the present. He's taking care of the past. And guess what? He secured our future.
Yes.
He's given us a future. Our future is certain. I know you think it is. Our future is certain. See, sometimes we think we're working to get in. We ain't. We already get in. It's not our works that get us in. It's God's grace. He gave us a future. And God is faithful to take care of that future. He's given us the present. He took care of our past. And he's given us a future. So that's how God has blessed us. He's given us a bunch of things. It was his idea. He took care of it all. And now he's blessed us past, present, and future. Past, present, and future. God has blessed us. We didn't do that for us. He did that for us. Then the question is, who else has forgotten their blessings?
Good question.
Yes, that's the question. Who else has forgotten their blessings? Now, Paul told this to the Corinthians. He done spent a year and a half teaching them all of this. He done left, and he gets word of all this craziness going on. They got winds and waves all around them. Winds and waves. The things is chaos. But there was already chaos when he went to that city. Remember, I told you that playing the Corinthian meant that you was doing some messed up stuff. Because that's what they did in that city. They did a little bit of everything. Everything you can imagine that they was big and bad enough to do, they did it there. So all the stuff we do today, that stuff ain't just started. It's been going on for centuries. And anything you can think of that people do today, they were doing it there. Corinth was a rough place. They didn't have to worry about it though. Why? Because God had taken care of their past. What they used to be wasn't a problem. Now remember all of this. As we get into the scripture and we start reading this, it sets it up. It sets it up. Because he's going to talk about what they're doing today. And he's going to talk about who they're around them. But he also points out where they came from. And then he talks about God giving them a present. And then God guaranteeing them a future. And in chapters 15 and 16, he covers that future.
Let me just back just a little
Go
bit.
ahead.
Because you hit on something that Paul did. He asked them, do you remember your blessings?
Amen. He did.
He pointed out the grace of God. He talked to them about the grace because later on in the letter, he gave them the whipping.
Yes.
But the same with us.
Yes.
We need to beef us up. We talked a little bit about that. Let's talk about remind us of our blessings.
Amen.
Before we give us what we really need, that whipping. And Paul don't usually come out like this.
Nope.
This is not how he come out. He usually open his letter with thanksgiving.
Amen. Amen.
You know, but he couldn't do that. He wanted to remind them of the grace of God because they was already full of faults. He didn't. You notice he didn't come out ragging on them about what they did.
Nope.
What he was really there to talk to them about. He didn't do it up front. This man had a smooth way about. See, he knew. There's a lot of Pauls in here today. Amen. We have been knocked down off our horse. I have to say I am. I've been one that has been knocked off my horse. So now when God raised me up, I'm not so critical up front. But you're going to get it.
Yes.
But later. I'm reminding you of who you are, the grace of God. He could have came out talking about you got fornication, you're sleeping with this one wife, you like you do. He could have did all of that, but he talked about God's grace. Yes, and it was reminding me that God's grace is so sufficient for all of us in the midst of all of our mess.
Yes.
So we need to start a new approach.
Amen. Amen.
We all are ministers of God. Yes. We all are to teach and correct and reprove. But let's do it. Let's remind them of the grace of God. Because sometime along the way, people will straighten themselves out.
Yes.
And I believe some of those Gentiles begin to straighten up.
Yes.
I believe some of them begin to think about the bad things that they had done and begin to think about how God had blessed them.
Amen.
So I just wanted to
bring he did great because he reminded them of God's love. So that's what.
And he did it in love. Yeah. He himself did it. He demonstrated what he was about to preach. That love.
And he had somebody with him that was a good example of God's grace and love. So since this was that, they knew who he was. And they knew what he had done before he got saved. They go, that's right, he's still hanging out with Paul, building churches.
And remember, these same Gentiles saw what happened to Stephen with Paul consenting to it. So they know this man done changed now. He is really, really right. And who better can tell you something about God than somebody who has gone through it themselves? You can't tell me nothing if you ain't been through nothing. Yes. Paul been through something to get to where, because what the word said when he said God told the disciples, he said they was all afraid of Paul. He told them don't worry about him because he gonna suffer much. Yeah. But my name said, and he did.
Yes,
and he did. And a lot of us, take up that cross and follow Jesus. Go ahead, Reverend.
Okay. So Paul is pointed out to them. He reminded them of their blessings. He's reminded them of God's grace. He reminded them that the whole thing was God's idea, that God built it. Yes. It wasn't their church.
The church belonged to God. Not to the preachers, not to the deacons, not to the people, to God.
Yes. And he pointed out to them who they were. He's reminded them that they're saints of God.
That's right.
That means they're set aside for God's work. So he reminded them that God's given them gifts. That they didn't just come up with this. God gave it to them. So Paul is reminding them of, he set them up before he can start to tell them their story. He's got to tell them, here's some things we got to fix. Because he's painted the picture. This is who we are. This is where we come from. This is what we about.
Let me say this here. Another thing I wanted to say, the first evidence to the Corinth was evidence of God by seeing Paul himself
Amen.
doing this here work. Remember, a bad man,
Amen.
a really bad man.
Yes.
This is evidence to the Corinthians church that God, you saying me, I'm so bad, and now here I am writing a letter to the church. That's evidence of God right there. That was the first evidence. If they didn't believe nothing else, he
They
said
should have believed that.
they should have known that it was real. Because here we have a persecutor of a church. People who watch people be killed was doing. Now he's standing for what he was once a part of. That's a blessing right there. That's the first blessing. I'm writing this letter to y'all.
So he set them up, and so he's wanting them to keep these things. So he paint the picture. See, it's like when they want you to know how to recognize counterfeit bills, you know what they do? They show you the real ones.
That's right.
They don't show you the counterfeit ones and what's wrong with them. They have you look at and study the real ones. So you study the real ones. And that's what Paul's doing. He's having them study the real thing. He's gonna show them the counterfeit in a minute.
Oh,
but he have them study the real thing. So he's talking about, he's painted the picture of what's real.
Yes.
And then next week we'll start looking at the counterfeit. Okay. But he starts off with what's real. Here's what's real. Here's the real. We're going to look at the real bill first. And we're going to recognize it. And we're going to be able to recognize every inch of it. And that's why even without studying it, because they studied the real one so long, they could pick up a counterfeit right away and know it's counterfeit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they can't tell you what's wrong with it.
That's right.
But they know, because what they know is the real thing. And that's how come they can recognize a counterfeit, not because they study counterfeits. Mm-hmm. He wants you to study the real thing. Mm-hmm. So when you know the real one so well, won't be a problem in recognizing the counterfeit.
You got it.
And you might not even know why it's counterfeit, but guess what? It's counterfeit. Our minds work very interesting. There's a book called Blink, and it talks about that, and it talks about a thing called it's something about splicing. What it talks about, we lock in certain things, and that's what it talks about, and we can find out. Eventually, we don't know why we know this is counterfeit, but we know it is because we studied the real thing, and that's what he wants us to do, is to study. That's why he's bringing up all of these things about God. That's why he's pointing out who Jesus is and what he's done. He's wanting us to understand the real thing, and guess what? That's what cures some of that other stuff that he's going to want them to correct. Mm-hmm. It's easy to do after that. It's easy to do. Not because they learn what not to do. No, because they learn what to do. That's how you fix what not to do, by knowing what to do. See, we spend so much time studying what not to do. We don't need to do that. Study what we're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Get to know that intimately. Mm-hmm. All the things that God wants you to do, all the blessings he wants to give you, get to know that intimately. And guess what? Satan come up to you with stuff. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be easier to recognize that ain't from God. And that's not what I need to do. And God will give you help to get away from it. Yes. All right. We out of time.
You don't have a few minutes just to talk about when Paul told them who they are, about the body, the universal part of the body.
Well, we mentioned that last time. I didn't want to get into it.
It was song wasn't here. Okay. Remind us.
Yeah, we'll hear a little bit about it next week, because it's going to help us in our study about, because next week we start to talk about their first big issue. Well, the first big issue we'll forget from this. Next week we're going to talk about division. We start to talk about division. Yes. And when we talk about division, we're going to be reminded that he said they were part of the universal body of Christ.
Yes,
So
yes, hit that.
remember I said this first little bit lines us up for all the rest.
That's right.
If we miss that part, it's going to be rough.
Mm.
But if you look back, and he's going to keep pointing us back. Paul did. He kept pointing them back to what he had already told them as they went through. So next week, our homework, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 10 through chapter 3, verse 23. And
What
if
say
you
that?
don't get all of that finished, that'll be homework for probably a couple of weeks.
1 Corinthians, the 10th verse.
1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 10 through chapter 3, verse 23.
Okay, so you might as well do 1, 2, and 3.
That's right. And like I said, you'll get a couple of weeks to soak all of that in. That's a lot to that, and we're gonna walk through that a little bit. We won't be running through it. We're gonna walk through it a little bit so that you'll. Yes, ma'am. Question. Oh, okay. So we're gonna walk through that a little bit. All right. All right. So we're gonna need somebody introduce themselves. Who is it never introduced themselves in our class? Never introduced themselves.
Right here.
Who's this?
Is this a Taylor?
Miss Taylor, you never introduced yourself. All right, Miss Taylor, come on, tell us who you are. All of those nice things on there. Tell us your name. Tell us about your family. Where are you from? What is important to you, and what you want to get out of this day.
Okay, my name is Judy Robinson Taylor. About my family, I have originally it was 7, 5. Everything. I lost my oldest sister in 2014. I have 2 sisters and a brother that are still living. I have 4 children, 5 granddaughters, 2 great granddaughters, and 2 great grandsons.
Okay.
I'm married to James Taylor. I am originally from Greenville, South Carolina, born and raised here.
Okay.
Traveled 20 plus years with my husband, different parts of the world. He was military. What is important to me, my family, and learning more about God. What I want to get from this study, and I've already gotten it. I have been very enriched. I've attended quite a few Bible studies and classes, but this one is awesome. And I look forward to it every week that I can take.
Amen. Amen. Let's give her a hand.
Wasn't it a blessing, the preacher that was preaching on Sunday? You could follow through and
Amen.
make sure he was telling it like it was. Wasn't it?
Amen.
He walked that thing right on down
Yes,
to what
he
we
did.
have really been teaching about.
Amen. All right, so it's prayer time, and we're gonna get, because we've got some fish and stuff for everybody who wants some. But it's prayer time, so our next class next week is the 24th. And so, is there any prayer requests? Any prayer requests?
I like to request prayer, continue to pray for my friend Ella Blackwell. I asked 2 weeks ago, she's still in the hospital.
Okay.
Listen to class prayers for her.
I have a prayer request for my nephew Benjamin Puritan, who had back surgery, had 2 discs removed, so.
Okay. Amen.
Yes.
Okay. All good. Definitely. I want us to pray for Willie Mitchell. They found out he's in rehab, and I forgot where, but he is in rehab at one of the hospitals. It's in Greer. It's the one in Greer, the Greenville Hospital System place in Greer. It's the same place where I think Sister Hurd was in there at one point. I can't think of the name, but anyway, you have to know which. There's an email. The deacons have it where he is, because you have to know which one of those buildings to go to find him. Well, it gives you the location, but you got to know which one of those buildings But if you want to go see him or something, you can see one of the deacons. They got his information where it is. But do pray for Brother Willie Mitchell. We want to pray for Sister Bailey. She's not here tonight. Yes,
I want to pray for my son Reggie. He will be traveling this weekend, coming to South Carolina State from New York, so he's traveling by car. So please pray for
yes,
him.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. God's gonna take care of him. He'll be all right. He gonna look after him, put his arm around. And I want you to pray for a friend of mine. I know she's gonna be okay. She's all right. She works with me. Her name is Luz Restrepo. Her first name is Luz. Her last name is Restrepro. I think that's right. That's close. She's from Colombia, so she's not.
Yes, we're going on another vacation.
All right. All right.
These vacations coming around quick.
Yes.
Every
I
month.
just want to make a statement that I was just thinking about not coming tonight. And I think it was 20 minutes after 6.
Mhm.
I jumped up and just throwed on something. I say, my spirit say you need to be there, you'll miss something. I just wanted to let you know.
Amen.
But I'm here. And
Sometimes
I sure would have missed something.
Amen. All right. Do pray for our church family.
I sure would have missed something. Thank you.
Anybody with prayer requests? Okay.
pray for our children. They're on spring, fall breaks, I believe, or something like right now.
I'm gonna ask Brother Darrell to pray for us tonight, if you don't mind. If you come and pray for us, yeah, we're gonna get in the circle, yeah. And also after you finish, I want you to say the grace. She mad at me. That's all right. She'll be all right.
All right, let's bow our heads.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Father, for this beautiful night.
Yes.
Bible study. Thank you for everybody who has assembled in your presence.
Yes,
Lord.
Father, thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you
Yes.
for everything that you will continue to do.
Yes, Lord.
Please forgive us for anything that we may have said or done that's not pleasing.
Yes, Lord.
The Lord, we pray for everyone on the prayer request list.
Yes, Lord.
That would be Miss Ella Blackwell and Mr. Benjamin Curitan.
Yes.
Pray that all goes well with his situation.
Yes, Lord.
Yes, Lord.
In addition to Mr. Willie Mitchell,
Yes.
Sister Bailey,
Yes.
Reggie Ford,
Yes, Lord.
Luz Restrepo,
Yes, Lord.
our family that's on vacation,
Yes.
family,
Yes.
this wonderful, wonderful church.
Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord.
We're a part of,
Mm-hmm.
Miss Cheryl Pulley.
Yes.
Thank you for just giving us the opportunity to continuously on a week by week basis to get
Yes.
the best education.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes.
Lord.
We forget learning about our history
Mm-hmm.
in you.
Yes,
The
Lord.
power of your word.
Yes.
I'd like to go ahead and transition on to giving thanks for the food that has been prepared.
Yes, Lord.
For the nourishment of our bodies.
Mhm.
In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. All right. The challenge on